So you want to know how we figure out the value of networks? Huh? Especially with Bitcoin and all those online platforms blowing up.
It's not exactly like putting a price tag on, like a pair of shoes.
Right. It's a real head-scratcher.
It gets complicated.
It does. But that's why we're diving into Metcalfe's law today.
Exactly. It helps explain some of this.
And we've got 3 really interesting research papers to pick apart.
Should be fun.
Oh yeah, I'm excited about this one. Buckle up. Because this first paper, let me tell you, it jumps right into Bitcoin.
Which, depending on who you ask,
Yeah. Could be completely worthless or...
but for future of money.
Right. But that's a whole other deep dive. This paper, though, it uses this surprisingly relatable example to break things down. Italian telephone tokens, called gettoni.
But I've actually seen these things. They're like little relics from a time before cell phones were everywhere.
Exactly. And they're the perfect analogy for Bitcoin. See, these gettoni, they were basically tokens you used within a physical network, the payphone system.
You had to use them to make calls.
And just like Bitcoin, their value went up and down based on how many people were using payphones.
And whether they thought the price of, making a call was going to go up.
It's that whole supply and demand thing.
Economics 101, but with a fun vintage twist.
I like it. And this paper points out something really interesting. People used to hoard these gettonis, just like some people hoard Bitcoin today.
It's that fear of missing out, thinking like, if I don't get in now, I'll miss the boat.
Totally. And that right there is the human element of network economics. Our emotions, our perceptions, they all play a role.
It's not just about the numbers, it's psychology.
Absolutely. But this paper, it does get into the numbers a bit. It digs into how Metcalfe's law actually plays out in the real world with Bitcoin.
And to understand that, we got to lay down some groundwork.
Foundation.
Okay, so imagine 4 friends, right? They're all trying to sell concert tickets.
Okay, I can picture it.
Even if none of them actually buy a ticket from each other, just the fact that they're connected, that they can share information, that has value.
Yeah, makes sense. Suddenly, your chances of selling that ticket go up just by being part of that group.
More connections, more possibilities.
Even if no money changes hands right away.
Exactly. And that's Metcalfe's law in a nutshell. The more connections in a network, the more valuable it becomes.
Okay, so far so good. But this is where the paper gets really interesting.
Things are about to get mathy.
A little bit, yeah. They took this concept of Metcalfe's law and they applied it to Bitcoin.
Using real-world data. They looked at Bitcoin's price and the number of Bitcoin wallets out there from 2011 to 2017.
That's a pretty solid chunk of time.
Oh, yeah. And they even factored in those zombie Bitcoins, the ones that are, like, lost in the digital void, gone forever.
Talk about going the extra mile. So what did they find after all that number crunching?
Well, it turns out that for the most part, Metcalfe's law does a pretty good job of predicting Bitcoin's price.
So it holds up?
It does, mostly. Except for this one weird period between 2013 and 2014.
Uh-oh, what happened there?
That's the million-dollar question. The data kind of goes haywire. Yeah. And the authors of the paper, they suggest that this deviation, it could be a sign of market manipulation.
You mean like people messing with the system?
Potentially. Which just goes to show, even with fancy models and theories, human behavior can throw a real wrench in the works.
It's unpredictable.
You got it. And that's what makes this whole thing so fascinating. It's not just about the numbers. It's about understanding how people behave within these complex systems.
Okay, so we've gone from payphones to Bitcoin to market manipulations. This deep dive is already full of twists and turns.
And we're just getting started. But, enough about Bitcoin for now. Let's talk about something a little closer to home.
Okay, what do you have in mind?
This next paper, it takes us into the world of medicine.
Ooh, medicine. Always a hot topic.
And they're grappling with this challenge, one that I think a lot of people can relate to, the whole idea of one-size-fits-all solutions.
Oh yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Like a treatment that works for everyone. Doesn't always happen.
Exactly. And when it comes to our health, those individual differences, they matter.
Big time. It's like you wouldn't expect the same diet to work for a marathon runner and like someone who just wants to stay relatively healthy.
Exactly. Or think about it like this. How often have you come across, medical advice or treatments that claim to work for everyone?
All the time. You see it everywhere.
In this paper, they argue that this reliance on the average patient, it can actually hold back progress, especially when it comes to finding personalized solutions.
Personalized medicine, yeah. I've been hearing more and more about that.
It's the future, potentially. But to get there, we need a different approach.
Okay, so what do they propose? What's the alternative to this average patient model.
This is where it gets really interesting. They talk about the concept of an information commons.
An information commons. Okay, now you're just using big words to sound smart.
Uh-huh. Maybe a little, but it's actually a pretty simple idea. Imagine a world where all the data from medical research, it's openly shared. A giant pool of knowledge.
Okay, I'm listening. What would we do with all that data?
Well, for starters, it could help us develop more targeted, more effective treatments.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But how do we actually create this information commons? It sounds like a logistical nightmare.
It's definitely a challenge. Right now, a lot of medical research happens in silos. Different institutions, different researchers, all working on their own thing.
Yeah, I can see how that would slow things down.
And this paper, they argue that we need to break down those silos, pool our knowledge. Because if we can connect the dots between all that research.
You might actually start to see the bigger picture.
Exactly. They even make this great analogy about the age of exploration. You know those early maps, the ones that were full of blank spaces?
Oh yeah, like here be dragons and all that.
Exactly. They say our understanding of human biology and disease, it's kind of like those early maps. We've got some of the outlines, but there are still so many unknowns.
So we need better maps.
We need better maps, more detailed, more accurate. And they believe that Metcalfe's law, the more data points we have.
The better the map.
Exactly. The more researchers, clinicians, even patients, the more people contribute to this information commons, the more valuable it becomes. It's like each piece of data is a star.
Okay, I love this analogy. Keep going.
And as we connect those stars, right, we start to see the constellations, the patterns that were hidden before.
Beautiful. It's like the more we know, the more we realize we don't know.
That's one way to put it, but it also highlights the incredible potential here.
Okay, so let's say we can actually pull this off, create this information commons. What does that look like in the real world? Give me some concrete examples.
Well, this paper, it actually points to some real-world examples that are already happening. They highlight the work of Sage Bionetworks and their platform, Synapse.
Synapse is doing some really cool stuff. They're trying to build a hub for open collaboration in biomedical research.
So it's like a digital library for medical data.
Kind of, but instead of books, you've got data sets, code, research findings, all accessible to anyone.
That's pretty amazing, but also kind of scary. I mean, all that sensitive medical data just out there in the open. Yeah, there are definitely risks involved. And platforms like Synapse, they take security and patient privacy very seriously.
Good to know. But even with all the precautions in the world, it does make you think about the potential downsides of this whole information commons idea, doesn't it?
For sure. And that's something this paper touches on as well. As we move towards this more interconnected future, we got to be mindful of the trade-offs.
Absolutely. Speaking of interconnectedness, this last paper, it takes us back to the good old days of, well, maybe not the good old days, but definitely a simpler time, the early days of Web 2.0.
Web 2.0, when social media was still shiny and new.
Remember when Facebook was just for college kids?
Those were the days.
So what does Web 2.0 have to do with Metcalfe's law and all this talk of information commons?
Well, this paper argues that those early social media platforms, they were onto something.
Yeah. What's that?
They tapped into the power of social connections, which, if you think about it, is kind of what Metcalfe's law is all about.
More connections, more value.
Exactly. But this paper, it takes it a step further. They suggest combining those Web 2.0 principles, connecting people, with the semantic web.
The semantic web. Okay, now you're just messing with me.
I promise it's not as complicated as it sounds. Basically, it's a web where information is not only connected but also understood by machines.
So instead of just connecting with your friends on Facebook, you'd be connecting ideas, data points, across different platforms, different fields of knowledge.
Exactly. It's like taking that information commons concept to a whole new level.
I'm picking up what you're putting down. So if we could actually pull this off, what would it mean? Like, what's the big payoff?
The possibilities are pretty mind-blowing, honestly. Imagine a world where we could connect the dots between all that data, medical breakthroughs, solutions to climate change, you name it.
It's like the more we connect, the smarter we get, collectively.
Precisely. And that's why Metcalfe's law is so relevant to, well, everyone.
It's not just some abstract theory.
Nope. It has very real implications for how we understand value in a world that's becoming more interconnected by the day.
I'm getting chills just thinking about it. It's like those early adopters of Bitcoin, the researchers sharing their findings on Synapse, they were tapping into this powerful force without even realizing it.
And it just goes to show progress often happens when we're willing to break down those silos and collaborate, even if it means challenging the way things have always been done.
Because the rewards could be enormous.
Exactly. And it's not just about scientific breakthroughs or whatever. Think about the everyday implications, the online communities you're a part of, the causes you support, even the way you connect with friends and family. It's all based on these same principles of networks and connections.
Wow, you've really brought it all home. So what's the takeaway here? What should our listeners do with all this information?
Your choices matter. Whether it's choosing to use an open source platform, supporting organizations that promote data sharing, or just being mindful of how your own data is being used, you have a role to play in shaping the future of these networks.
I love that. You have a voice, make it heard. Well, that was quite the deep dive. We went from payphones to Bitcoin to the future of medicine and beyond.
Only on the deep dive.
Ha, that's right. But seriously, I hope you've all learned something new today about Metcalfe's law, network economics, and the power of connections.
It's a wild world out there, but understanding these concepts can help you navigate it.
And on that note, we'll leave you with this final thought. If Metcalfe's law applies to the sharing of data in medical research, imagine the value of an information commons that encompasses all types of data about every aspect of human experience.
The breakthroughs that could be possible, it's mind-boggling.
It's a future worth striving for. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive, and we'll see you next time.
Until then.